should appear at the bottom of your screen, next to the Share Screen button. By clicking on the Interpretation button, you can choose the language you would like to hear. The Interpretation button will then transform this meeting into the selected language. To change the language you would like to hear again, follow the previous procedure by clicking on that same button. By default, you will hear the selected language at 80% volume and the original audio at 20% volume. If you would like to mute or unmute the original audio, click on the corresponding option within the language button. Enjoy your meeting. Bienvenue à votre réunion avec l'ICM. Comme la réunion propose une interprétation simultanée en français, le bouton Interprétation devrait apparaître en bas de votre écran à côté du bouton Partager l'écran. En cliquant sur le bouton Interprétation, vous pouvez choisir la langue que vous souhaitez entendre. Le bouton Interprétation se transforme alors en la langue sélectionnée. Pour changer à nouveau la langue que vous souhaitez entendre, suivez la procédure précédente en cliquant sur le même bouton. Par défaut, vous entendrez la langue sélectionnée à 80% de volume et l'audio original à 20% de volume. Si vous souhaitez couper ou supprimer l'audio original, cliquez sur l'option correspondante dans le bouton de la langue. Bonne réunion. Bienvenido a su reunión de la ICM. Como la reunión ofrece interpretación simultánea en español, el botón Interpretación debería aparecer en la parte inferior de su pantalla, junto al botón Compartir pantalla. Haciendo clic en el botón Interpretación, puede elegir el idioma que desea escuchar. El botón Interpretación cambia entonces al idioma seleccionado. Para volver a cambiar el idioma que desea escuchar, siga el procedimiento anterior pulsando el mismo botón. Por defecto, oirás el idioma seleccionado a un 80% de volumen y el audio original a un 20%. Si quieres silenciar o desilenciar el audio original, haz clic en la opción correspondiente del botón de idioma. Disfruta de su reunión. Bienvenido.
Thanks, Bruna. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, and welcome and thank you for joining us from all parts of the world as we begin this series of AIME webinars, where we explore the WHO framework for action, the 7 steps to strengthen quality midwifery education. My name is Felicity Copeland. I'm a midwife based in Australia, working for UNFPA headquarters, and it's my great pleasure to be part of the AIME group, the Alliance to Improve Midwifery Education, which is a partnership that was formed in 2022, so just last year, by UNFPA, together with WHO, ICM, UNICEF, as well as JPIGO, Momentum USA, Lardell Global Health, Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and the Burnett Institute. So we are many. AIME is dedicated to supporting midwifery education and training globally and provides opportunities for midwifery educators and in fact all of those involved in midwifery work to network, to share and to learn together about midwifery education across the globe. In fact, you'll be seeing a little bit more of AIME and the work that we do very soon as we're about to launch the new ICM and UNFPA direct entry and post-nursing midwifery program, as well as some standalone education modules. So please watch this AIME space. AIME is very grateful to Johnson & Johnson and also to the Gates Foundation for their support. And I also want to add how grateful we are for the leadership of Sarah Baziv and Geeta Lal in UNFPA headquarters. I'm here today with my colleagues. They were in the box beside me. I can't see them now. My colleagues Erin Ryan, the Midwifery Educator Advisor from ICM. Actually, Bruna, I might ask you to put them up. If you can, thank you. So Erin's there, and Chisato Masuda, the Midwifery Program Analyst from UNFPA headquarters. And we are ably supported by Bruna Bimbato, the Digital and Logistical Coordinator with ICM in Brazil. Thank you. And a very special thank you to our interpreters who are very busy translating for our Spanish, French, and Arabic-speaking colleagues. And I know that some of you got up at 4:30 a.m. to make this call, so full appreciation to you. So today's webinar starts with the very first step of the WHO Framework for Action, Leadership and Policy. We'll be hearing from two speakers who will share with us their considerable expertise about the significance of having strong midwifery leadership and the impact this can have on the visibility and also the availability of midwives to provide really sound quality care. We want to embed positive quality policies into our midwifery education. So I won't talk much longer, but we are aware that we're all a little bit webinar fatigue thanks to COVID. So we really want to engage with you during the process of this session. So we encourage you, as we can see that you've put things in the chat box, introduce yourselves. If you want to post or paste, post anything in the chat box that you find helpful for you, we can share that, which would be wonderful. We'd also like you to post some questions and answers in the little square at the bottom of your screen. If you can't find it and you've got some comments to make as you listen to the speakers, just pop them in the chat box and we'll try to get to them. I know there's lots on this call, so we're very excited to get starting. I'm about to hand over to my colleague Erin, who is going to introduce you to the 7 steps and also to our first speaker. Over to you, Erin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felicity. I'm going to pause and make sure our Arabic translator, Abel, can you hear and you're able to translate? Because I saw something pop in the chat that you could not hear. I'm going to keep going unless I see that come back. Welcome, everyone. Super exciting to be here. This is the WHO Framework for Action that you can see here on your screen. And we all know that quality midwifery education is urgently needed to improve not just quality of care and end maternal newborn mortality and stillbirths, and to deliver the UHC agenda, but also 50 other maternal indicators and infant indicators could be improved if we strengthen midwifery education. And we know there must be a lot of interest and passion about this because over 1,000 people registered for this webinar today. And I've been watching the chat and I love seeing all these different countries. We've got people from everywhere from Kenya and to the Philippines, back down to New Zealand and Australia. We've got people from America, Cameroon, Namibia, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. It's absolutely amazing to have so many wonderful people here. If you haven't had a chance, please feel free to put the name of the country you're from in the chat so we can see who's here. I also see some names I recognize, as well as some folks that I don't know. So good to see you, Duncan, Sheila, Lakshmi, Mitali. You seem to be everywhere I go, Mitali. So because there's so much interest, the WHO looked into what was really needed to help people strengthen midwifery education. And they started doing this in 2015, 16, and 2017. And in 2019, they released this framework. This is a 7-step action plan to strengthen quality midwifery education. This framework identified 3 strategic priorities for harnessing the power of midwives. 1, we have to rethink education and certification of midwives to international standards. That means using the ICM global standards as well as the standards from WHO. It means rethinking midwifery leadership, and it means stronger alignment of partners to improve quality midwifery education. The action plan can be used to develop or strengthen a national midwifery education plan. So this means if you already got an education plan, you can make it better. If you don't have one, you can use this framework to start a plan. The action plan recognizes that there's a wide variation in midwifery education provided across the countries. It acknowledges that some countries are going to be able to rapidly move a high quality cadre of midwives, and other countries are going to need a lot more investment and time. And this means the framework is flexible and adaptable. So let's look at the 7 steps. You can really start almost anywhere, but the way they've got it labeled is that you start with leadership and policy, then you gather data and evidence, build public engagement and advocacy, prepare educational institutions, practice settings, and clinical mentors, then strengthen faculty and curricula, educate students, and then monitor and adjust. And then that means the cycle starts over and continues. Over the next few months, we're going to be going through each one of these steps of the framework. And today we are going to be focusing on strengthening leadership and policy. So before we start, let's have a poll. We want to hear about midwives and leadership in your country. You can see here on this slide, we've got 3 questions. We're going to post the poll in 1 second. Do you have a chief midwife in your country? Do your midwifery leaders have a strong presence in your government? In your role as a midwife, do you have opportunities to become a leader? And you're going to be able to answer yes, no, or don't know, because it's possible that you don't know or you're unsure. So you should be able to have the option to answer the question, and you can go ahead and answer that now. If the poll is in front of the questions and you can't see them in your language, you can move the poll over so you can read the question. Oh, the answers are flying in, Felicity.
Great.
Okay. Wow. All right. So chief midwife was looking like a heavy no, but now I'm seeing it's going to almost be maybe 50-50. We'll give that a second to see if there's a few more answers. Do your midwifery leaders have a strong presence in government? 54% say no, and then another almost 20% say not sure. So that sounds like not a lot of midwifery leadership in government. And in your role as midwife, do you have an opportunity to become a leader? Well, it's exciting. 65% are saying yes, and the rest are saying no or don't know. All right. If you do have a chief midwife, I wouldn't mind seeing a few of those in the chat so we can see who's got chief midwives, or if you only have a chief nurse. That's an important distinction. I saw that Alma just posted only nurses have these opportunities. And we need to know that if only nurses have the opportunities. All right. I'm going to share the results so you can see what I was seeing. Thank you for this. And we're going to hear a bit more about each of these as we move forward. So let's move to our first guest that we will be chatting with today. Pandora Hartman. She is the chief nurse midwife of Jipaigo. And I'd rather say that I don't need to give much of an introduction here for Pandora because she is a very well-known global leader and midwife of over 20 years. She's worked closely with ministers of health, midwifery organizations, and leaders as well. And she's done this to provide strategic direction, clinical and programmatic assistance on every level of midwifery, maternal and sexual reproductive health programs. She has been a champion of promoting midwifery leaders locally in her own community and in the whole world. Thank you so much for joining us, Pandora.
Thank you for having me.
Let's jump right in. I've got some questions for you. Can we just start with you telling us a little bit about your role as chief nurse midwife at Jipaigo?
The role is one that I say there are never 2 days alike. And I think that's what kind of keeps it interesting, but also keeps you on your toes constantly. Jipaigo, as a very, very large global, international, non-governmental organization, I like to say I wear 5 basic hats in that there's a lot of global representation for things and really giving thought leadership around midwifery. Then there's the internal side as well that governs some of the management type issues for not just midwives and nurses, but we've also got clinicians and clinical officers as we do a lot of the program implementation all over the world. So we've got thousands of staff spread out everywhere. And then really just looking at supporting locally, regionally as well in some country level programs, depending upon what is happening. So there's everything from staff development to the dreaded budget, which is sitting on my inbox right now.
That's an exciting role. It's a big role too. I just want to acknowledge, like, you're a midwife and you're a global leader. I see the world right there behind you. You've got you're in charge. And how, what do you think makes strong midwifery leaders? How can we have more midwifery leaders like you in the world?
Well, you know, it's a question that has come up more and more with the focus on leadership. And okay, so this is going to sound really slogany, but I still think of just do it. You know, that good old Nike slogan, just do it, less talk, more action, because I do truly believe that each one of us is a leader in our own rights. And that part of midwifery's challenge is sometimes we can be a little inactive waiting for people to do it for us. And well, you know, my official bio always talks about pushing past the perineum. And I truly believe that, like, we kind of get out of that unilateral focus and see the bigger world and just do stuff, you know, in other realms outside of midwifery, because leadership, I think the pathways to leadership and creating it is getting out of our bubbles as well. You know, often talking to each other, talking to ourselves, and just do what you can where you can as well. Truly, I believe that it's not up to just, yes, we need, you know, government support and all of those things. However, it's in our hands.
People have to do it. And actually, anyone in this room today is a leader, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. You know, whether you're there at the bedside, whether you're there's different levels of leadership as well when we think about this. And you can be a leader at the bedside. Some people will be more comfortable there. Some people, you know, will be more comfortable in other worlds, as you were saying, and you grow. I mean, thinking from my perspective, this was all totally accidental. I mean, this was never where I could have dreamed seeing myself a long time ago. So you never know. Yeah. You never know what can happen.
So along those lines, Pandora, you know, you've championed a lot of young midwives, young leaders. Like, that's been a big passion of yours. Was there anyone that championed you as a young midwife and becoming a young leader?
No, actually. It's interesting because there's all this talk about mentorship now, and there's a couple of us that, you know, we do have these discussions. Well, there's where we see the generational gap as well. There's still quite a few of us who came up through the School of Hard Knocks. And knowing too that is possible. And you just kind of, I think of one early incident in my career that really shaped the leadership pathway. Imagine a labor suite and a night shift, right? And there's two of you. The baby comes in, heart rate's down in the 60s. Not a good look for anybody, right? So you're doing what you do best with the team and went ahead and released the bag of waters. In this case, I remember there was pea soup, meconium. You know, put on a fetal scalp electrode, the baby's not rising, activate, you know, small community hospital, get the obstetricians in, get the kid out, okay, fine. However, I wound up in the director's office with a citation and disciplinary action. Now, how does that relate? It relates to leadership in that what I didn't realize was that became a practice policy, internal policy issue, because the midwives, there was another, I was working with a Scottish midwife. I see her face now. And the policy dictated that midwives were not allowed to rupture the bag of waters.
Oh.
So regardless of the outcome, I was still in disciplinary action. So that, you know, when you think about shaping events, even though I still stayed in communication with the mom at the grocery store for years beyond, that really showed me how it's not always about doing the right thing, that sometimes those shaping forces that are around what's happening can really get you into some challenges. Yeah. And so that's really kind of when I began digging around at some of the policy related issues, the protocols surrounding midwifery practice, and actually discovered a Midwifery Practice Act that hadn't been updated since the 1940s. So you see, one thing kind of leads to another and led to another, and that really had nothing to do with direct mentorship, but like I said, that School of Hard Knocks, which can also teach us lessons as well.
So you kept following up because you continued to do the right thing, it sounds like. So leaders do the right thing, even in the face of finding out that you're not supposed to be doing it. So you changed it for others. Did you get that act changed? Can people now rupture membranes if needed? Well,
the internal policies did change because we were looking at internal policies, but then looking at some of the external policies related to country level stuff, which did change in the end. But actually, the battle still goes on, I think, looking at regulatory issues, and as scope of practice continues to evolve in what midwives can and can't do. So it's interesting, but I say that to say it's possible. And we can also pull from other resources as well. You know, when we think of mentorship, it's not even always as a person. I love books. I love music. I love, you know, all these other things that can also, you can draw from to inspire your path on those days that you will have where you feel like you really can't go on because it's just too much.
It does feel sometimes it's insurmountable when you find out there's a country law or a global restriction keeping you from doing what you know is right and what you know would save lives, right? So do the right thing in a situation. So what else? Talk a little bit more about what makes a good midwife leader.
Good midwife leaders have to be passionate. I think we all have to accept that we can't always do everything everywhere. You know, so there's a letting go, picking out a couple of things that you're really, really good at, and finding an external network, you know, to perhaps fill in some of the pieces that you're not so good at, where you can phone a friend or call someone or send the raging emoji text, you know, all of those things. To be a good leader, there's the nurturing, there's your flock, there's your having to stay on top of things, you know, in terms of clinical practice, doing your reading, taking the time out. I think just understanding it's a continual growth process to leadership and that it never, ever stops.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It keeps going. You know, I guess it's such a fantastic framework, but I'm hearing you reference something that's not in the framework, which is taking care of ourselves and making sure that we stop. Can you talk a little bit more about that for folks? How can the people in this room take care of themselves, and why should they be taking care of themselves?
If you don't take care of yourself, you won't last. You know, we're all hearing about the great resignations, as they're calling it, or what I see more midwives doing is the quiet quitting, you know, where we're just not completely engaged or completely there. And so you're kind of giving up on some things. So in terms of taking care of yourself, I try, and I fail sometimes, but I try to incorporate one or two simple things every day, my simple treats, you know, to nurture myself. What is sitting in the backyard with that cup of a coffee and just pause, literally just taking that pause, because if we're empty, there's nothing left. So it's not always those big long time frames where you're just going to take time off, but a little moment every day. If we can do that, you know, how else are you going to build public advocacy or, you know, any of the things that are referenced in the step when you don't have that creative energy, you know, that has been taken within yourself with that. So whatever makes you happy, 5 minutes of happiness.
5 minutes of happiness a day. Well, I will make sure I'll ask the WHO to add that to the framework, see if we can get that adjusted in volume 2. You know, I had a midwife partner for many years who, you know, a lot of us are from cultures where if you have people, you would always serve them first. I mean, I can't imagine serving myself or pouring my cup of tea before I would pour yours, Pandora. It would be unheard of. But she would always say, but you have to fill your cup first, or you have nothing else to share. You have nothing else to give. So it is really important. If we want to be leaders, we have to start by taking care of ourselves.
Absolutely. That's the radical revolution in and of itself, right? Self-care has to be a radical revolution. If not, you know, when I look at some of the workforce data where we're losing midwives, I look at the Americas, well, the United States of America in this case, they're losing some before they even finish like paying off their school loans. You know, after all of that investment, because everyone is simply just tired, you know. And I speak to other administrators, managers out there. We have to, I think as leaders, also champion it from the other side and pushing back against some of the policies that are not looking at flexible work agendas, or, you know, midwives missing their family, their friends, all of their, because we're working, giving. So I think, you know, managers, administrators at every level, we're doing not just the individual taking care, but also looking at the every level, how are we all building each other and helping to advocate for our staff, our workers in the field?
Yeah, we do have to be advocating for each other. We need to make sure in a world where there is not gender equity, where women in particular and midwives do not have the same equity often as men or doctors. And those are not all equated. I know there's women doctors, but we do need to be working. I hear that. I hear what you're saying, to lift each other up and be each other's champions. Be our own champion, but be each other's and help each other out.
Yep. And that's, look, I look at it as actually still part of the framework. Step 4, what does it talk about? Preparing practice settings. So that's not just whether you have a CTG or, you know, all the latest bells and whistles, but it's preparing the other pieces, or looking at when we're talking about building public advocacy. Well, we are not just the flying angels, are we, out there, you know, about public advocacy around these broader issues. We're midwives as well. We can build coalitions, you know, building coalitions with others, because women in general are struggling with these issues, you know, and then around all the, you know, the other stuff I mentioned. So yeah, we are enacting the framework, but I think that goes back to what I said earlier about leadership. It's also getting out of the perineum. You know, who are those other groups who have some of the similar issues that we can bond with?
Yeah.
And I think it's good for all of us to have friends outside of the profession as well. So we get a lot.
I mean, so yeah, champion ourselves, champion each other's, and coalitions with other people. This is great. I hope that people are hearing this. We've got a couple questions that I'd like to ask you from the chat. The first one, which ties right into this, is how do you get your voice heard? Like, how did you manage to get your voice heard? It is hard sometimes.
I think it's sheer stubbornness on my part, to be honest. So I think that personality-wise has something to do with it. So getting your voice heard is also analyzing yourself, you know, because there's frontline people who take the hit sometimes, you know, out there, and there's others who feed the information up the pathway, right? So your voice can be heard in every way, whether it's sending that text message that's giving a leader the information that she or he may need to really do the advocacy framework, or that story from the ground. Or actually, it's funny because I think of when we were working on the AIME framework and I did a phone a friend, there was an issue. I'm seeing us all, and immediately I had responses from 7 countries. So they were getting their voices heard, pushing the information up the channel in different ways. It's being creative about it.
Yeah. I was just going to say that, right? It's also sometimes if a door is truly closed, we should definitely keep knocking, but sometimes we need to turn around because the door behind us is open. And we need to be looking for where the path is, right? Take that path and keep building strength, momentum, and coalitions.
Absolutely. There's that Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, which is a favorite of mine, you know, back to my books and my inspiration, that talks about don't go where a path may lead, but forging a new trail.
Yeah. Absolutely. I've got another question for you. I could keep going on that, but I better answer the audience. They're the ones that we're here for the audience. I'm going to read it. It's a little long here. My observation has been that in those countries where midwifery is being strengthened, not all midwives are confident enough to take on the role of practicing their full scope. How can midwife leaders and leadership enhance the confidence of practicing midwives to take on their role effectively and not abdicate their power, especially clinical power?
Ooh, that is a complicated question. So the question dealt with the areas of competency where you may not feel as strong to begin with. Well, I was saying earlier that not all of us can do everything, right? Nor all of us should do everything. So finding a really critical self-analysis of your strengths, right? The strengths and the weakness of the persons, the individuals, the systems. I do find as a leader, sometimes this is something we have a little bit of challenge of as midwives, where, you know, we kind of want to say we're good at everything. So who's not good, right? And so then how can we get those who are not good, but you're interested? Okay. So I have found career-wise, there's a lot of designing your growth path, your CPD path to actually put into yourself a little bit too, and not just waiting for the system to give it to you. So I would say, midwives, if that's where you're not good at, first of all, admit it in safe space, get resources to do those, and then start the individual learning to grow it back. Because you're not giving away your power, you cannot come halfway to the table. Understanding the strategies and the challenges that are midwifery, we cannot just talk without the solid competencies and actions to back it up. Because that's also where then we lose more ground if you're not coming to with that strong, solid clinical knowledge and foundation. Okay, so it's a multiple path. Once you have that, there's no physician, no politician, nobody in the world who can say, well, because you've got the solid background. And then you can go back to the issue of reclaiming the power or claiming it, because there's some, like I think of babies. Babies are a neglected piece of midwifery care, that first 28 days. I can think of that with this. Well, now we're strong in the babies, you know, the baby knowledge, and then we can go forth and speak your voice. Because I do believe there is a danger if we go and give voice to something too soon when we're not ready for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We think about the damage that we can do to the greater good, because sometimes I think when we talk about leadership, this is also where leaders have to step back sometimes and be able to make hard decisions, where there's not everyone is going to win, but you're looking at that longer term strategy in building competencies. And then also I'm throwing the challenge out there as I look at leadership and we look at this issue of competency, there is a problem. There's a problem in midwifery because we're not allowing educators or administrators or anybody to actually stay clinically grounded because of the inflexible policies that are a lot of times in places at institutions, at facilities, at country level. Yes, I'm going in on this one because it's an issue. And so we're never going to be able to build that competency and take that power if a huge portion of our workforce is unable to access strengths, strategies, resources, facilities to keep that competence going. And as midwifery grows and the knowledge base grows, to keep that up. So when we look at this framework, and, you know, my favorite steps, building advocacy, step 1, 4, and 3, well, leaders out there, what are we doing to make it happen, to stay competent?
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you. Felicity, I know that I'm probably over time and I could keep going, but are there any other questions I missed there? I know there were more questions I didn't get to.
There are lots more questions and comments, and Pandora, I like the way you say network, you know, call a friend, because in the chat box there's so many people saying hello Pandora, hello Pandora. So clearly you know, a very beloved leader, and I don't believe for one second that you're an accidental leader and that, you know, it just happened, because I think you are showing such true insights into being a holistic leader, looking after yourself, recognizing, you know, as you said, the things you can't do, and to network and share and collaborate, and it's just wonderful. And we could get you back for every single step, Pandora. I mean, you know, they all overlap, they all work together, they all have to be aligned to work. So we will have some time at the very end, Pandora, because there are some great more questions in the box, but I really thank you from all of us here, and really appreciate your inspiring words of leadership. And courage, really. I think you're very courageous. So with that, thank you, Pandora, and thanks, Erin. I will now introduce our next speaker, who is the very wonderful Dr. Dan Okoro. And it's my very great pleasure to introduce Dr. Dan Okoro. He is an obstetrician and gynecologist, previously with the Ministry of Health in Kenya, and now he is the Sexual Reproductive Health Rights Advisor for UNFPA in Kenya. And Dan was one of the founding members of the Midwives Association in Kenya, and was a key stakeholder in establishing the first ever national nursing and midwifery policy. And I think just for that, we could make you an honorary midwife, Dan. That is fantastic. You know, we so need those policies in government, and we so need your voice. And Dan champions for quality care through midwifery-led models and through the direct entry midwifery program. So a very warm welcome to you, Dan. And I'm going to let Erin have a chat with you now. Thanks, Erin.
Dan,
Hi,
I am delighted to have you here. Thank you for coming. And you have done so much for midwives. And I'd love it if you could start by just telling us a little bit about your role as sexual reproductive health advisor in Kenya, specifically, of course, with what you've done a little bit more about midwifery.
Thanks, Erin, and thanks the team for having me here. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. Yes, I'll just be prescriptive on this so that it will just be brief in terms of what we do. With having a background of obstetric and gynecology, which sometimes people say, oh, okay, are you a senior midwife? But it's all about midwifery. It's about the mothers, about the newborns. So having worked with the Ministry of Health and now with the UNFPA, we do support in terms of looking at the technical support guidance and policy formulations at the Ministry of Health and even other partners. And more so looking at, which also includes midwifery, looking at sexual reproductive health and rights, access, ensuring access, universal access to quality of care. Because what we want to see is a zero preventable maternal deaths as far as this is concerned. So becoming a liaison and working in partnership with other organizations, other agencies to provide the technical support which is relevant to the maternal or enhancing or improving maternal and newborn outcomes. So in a nutshell, just more about technical support in these areas.
Thank you for that. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you promote midwifery leadership, and any stories from the field or lessons that you've learned that demonstrate effective midwifery leadership?
Thanks, Erin. I would first of all say that I'm quite passionate about midwifery. At first, as I was growing up, a young medical student had a phobia or had a fear of doing obstetrics or handling matters to the mothers, a pregnant mother, and the delivery, because I was looking at the two lives. The dyad, the life of the mother and the life of the baby, and said, now this is too complicated for me. I don't think I can handle this. But little did I know that that would become my destiny in terms of the professional. And also a little bit of background as a child, as I was growing up, I stayed at least for a few years in my primary school under the support of my grandmother, who happened to have been a traditional birth attendant. And so it looks like I kind of perfected her work, and but not that I was driven by what, but I still remember a few stories that she did mention during whenever she had stories of some of the maternal deaths that did occur in our village where I was staying. And I think we lost one of the students who was a teenager and who got pregnant and attempted abortion. One attempted abortion, another one in another place where had obstructed labor and died. And my grandmother, I could hear her saying that I cannot stay with a mother from what do I know nowadays, we say that from sunrise to sunset. And she could mention that she doesn't stay with a mother that long. So kind of, those are some of the things that even when I started practicing now, I could have that reflection, and it's probably some of these things which have already been written in the books. And I would say that in terms of supporting midwifery leadership, I read a bit about John C. Maxwell in terms of leadership, and says everything rises and falls on the leadership. And so therefore, even if we want great leadership in midwifery, we must also take the position of leadership as midwives. And that's also brought us into that perfect order. How do we ensure that we have a midwifery-led care? Because many times when you interact with the midwives, even where those who are working in the labor ward, the maternity, they introduce themselves, I'm a nurse, I'm a nurse, I'm a nurse. So nobody owns that process of the midwifery care, and therefore they don't have that lens. And the midwifery had existed as a chapter within the nursing fraternity, which is it's a place at least to host it for some time. And the roles need to become independent association or a body came up, and we supported that. And that's what about 8 years ago. It had been a long journey, and I think I've seen somebody making a comment on this, looking at how it was not an easy journey as such, because it was looked at we are dividing the nurses, as it were. That why are you splitting nurses? Actually, was somebody approached me one time and said, why are you dividing the nurses? So you see, because sometimes we look at it in the sense of ceding power or ceding control, because when you try to split, then somebody who was in charge of everybody now feels like you're taking a certain group from us. But I think we have different roles, and it has been seen even amongst the doctors. We have the obstetricians, they have their own association, they have the surgeons, they have the association, but there's still an umbrella body which brings them together, and that has not split them down. So there should have been no fear. But one of the things that we've felt that we're doing is establishing that association, which is growing, and so maybe whom we recognize as is growing largely to a great extent, and I think we are happy that we are even there in the Congress, in the ICM Congress, which took place in Indonesia, and supported the capacity assessment of that association as it grew. Then, of course, we need the support to develop the strategic plan, which expired, but now there's a new one which is just being in place beginning this year. So one of the things, other than just establishing the association, is just also to ensure that the midwives also build their capacity in development, the self-development, in the knowledge, because for us to have for them to be leaders, they need to develop, they need to have that capacity, they need to have the competency, then the boldness, because that is important, as Pandora has highlighted here. You have the courage to, because for you to stand out, you not stand out when you are not competent enough. So then having that knowledge. So always supporting and championing the midwifery for better outcome. And it doesn't matter which level you are. And still quoting again from John Maxwell is saying that the 360-degree leadership. You lead those who are above you, those who are your leaders, you can, because leadership is about influence. So you lead the peers, you lead even those who are below you, and just standing out because you can influence them and influence the change and be the leader that is so desired.
Thanks for that. I don't know John C. Maxwell. We'll need to look him up. If someone can, I'll put that reference in the chat. It sounds like a good reference for everybody. I heard you referring to midwifery-led care and the need to keep midwifery and nursing distinct and clear professions, or complementary professions that work together. There's a lot of different questions going on about, like, how do we do that? And it seems like kind of what I hear you hinting around a bit about is the enabling environment. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about what you see as an enabling environment that allows midwives to work in full scope, to have partnerships with obstetricians. You know, we hear about people struggling with their relationship. So can you talk a little about that, the enabling an environment?
Yes, midwives are cities for many healthcare workers, but more so with the midwives. I also put it specifically because I've gone through the same. They do work under a stressful environment. And we do understand that, just to quote from the ICM, the definition in terms of the enabling environment, verbatim is one that supports infrastructure, the profession and the system level integration needed for midwives to effectively practice their full scope of work. And that's just quoting from the ICM. And when you look at this, for us to have that place to deliver for the better outcomes of the mothers and for the newborns. One is the policy framework, which we have highlighted that maybe countries need to work. It may not be just separate as a midwifery policy, but you can still have the nursing and midwifery policy as we have had in Kenya, which guides, provides a framework for the midwives to operate in terms of their training, in terms of their deployment, in terms of their promotion, because there has to be a career pathway, in terms of the association. So one of the things that happens is that we need to maximize what the midwifery workforce do. What is their roles in the leadership within the health system? Mm-hmm. The midwives need to require tools. to work with. Okay, first of all, they need to be trained because we know the benefits of training a midwife and having supported in an enabling environment. So other than just being trained, educated and trained, then have got this legal framework and the scope of practice, which enables them to work in an ideal place, provide them with the tools, take care of their welfare. And then support them even with the evidence, because they're just looking at the evidence-informed practice. That's what I like sometimes to one of our colleagues, and especially looking at the White Ribbon Alliance. I think they have got they ran a campaign on www, which what women want, and then later on what midwives want, and looking at what is it that the midwives would want to see. I worked as a health provider and a manager in a facility, and some of the things that you need to have as a manager is to interact with the midwives. What is it, and therefore even others, what is it that they would want to see? And some of the things do not necessarily require money, and just provide the tools, and some of those tools are available. Of course, we have certain constraints in terms of supplies and equipment, which can be persistent, but just interact with them, because they just want somebody who supports them. And that interaction can provide just that environment. I remember one of the times I replaced as a manager, because you find after the mothers have given birth, they're given water to go and bathe. And you can imagine a mother carrying a bucket of water going to the bathroom. So what we just did was just spend a little money, renovate that bathroom, provide the shower. And that even, not only for the mother that became happy, but even the midwives themselves became happy, because now they do not have to struggle to look for the water for the midwives. So for the mothers. So we're looking at a situation where the policies are not restrictive on what's the scope of the practice for the midwives, and they will not be looked at as competitive against other cadres. Is the midwife able to provide some of the emergence of signal signs, like we look at even a manual removal of placenta? Does the scope of practice allow them to do that? Should they wait for the doctor to come? Because some of the places you only have one doctor, and it could be he or she could be in the theater, and here we have a mother who is bleeding. What else can they do? So the policies and the guidelines should be that allows and builds the capacity of the midwives to practice fully to what they are trained or educated to do. Yeah.
So Dan, I hear you saying that you would have supported Pandora to release the waters in that story she was telling and make sure that baby was delivered safely. That's what I hear you saying. I hear you saying if we have an enabling environment, we've got full scope of practice, we've got the resources we need, and we have the tools that we need to do our job, and we're paid, because we can't be not paid fairly or not paid at all, which I hear from some midwives. But it takes a balance, because if you're well paid but you go to work and there's no running water, it's still a failing system. Dan, I have literally 50 more questions for you. I always enjoy talking to you, but they are telling me we have 8 minutes left and I have to stop asking you questions. Okay. So thank you. It was delightful to have you here. You're an incredible champion of midwives, and I'm sure we'll have you back to hear more, because there are a lot more questions for you. Felicity, I better hand back to you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, that was so great, Dan. I had such a delightful time meeting you in Kenya and hearing all those great stories from the field. They just make midwifery really live and we can relate to it. And I really like that thing you just said, simply, interact. One of the things about enabling environments is interacting and supporting each other. So there is so much I got out of your talk. Thank you. Thank you so much. Erin, how do we run out of time? My gosh, we're too busy dancing, I think, at the beginning. So Bruna, let's just go to how much time, maybe we've got, I'm looking at the clock, we've got 6 minutes. Let's just sum up the quick 3 points of leadership, although we just, Dan just made a beautiful analogy about the enabling environment and quoted ICM. So we understand the enabling environment. And I think Pandora really brought that thing out about champions, finding your champions and being a champion, and that thing about just do it, just get moving. We can't wait for anyone else. Midwives have to be proactive. And I think midwives have to be political. I think that's what Pandora was saying. Really fight for change, really stand up, look after each other, look after yourself, admit your limitations, but be political, because we're trying to improve quality midwifery care and quality midwifery education. And being political is being present and pushing for policies to be embedded in government, to be a voice, to be at that table, to be visible. So that's our 3 key points, takeaways today. And I'm just looking at, maybe we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions. It's a nice question about, and it came up, Erin, you mentioned it, about the recognition between the separate cadres, nursing and midwifery, and how do we separate that, and how do we honour midwifery and bring that forward whilst still working beside our nursing colleagues? Does Dan or Pandora want to take that last question?
That is
Pandora, that'd be good.
For the end, because I think that is one of the most complex questions that is out there when it comes to looking at all the nuances. But terrible and beautiful in that, I think it goes back to what we're saying about the champions. There are nuances that are for both professions. So where are the strengths and where are the divergences? So I really think, spending some time to dig deep and to look into that. I'll say to those listening, how many of you have actually read your scope of practice? Your country level scope of practice, your facility level policies and protocols, to really even begin to see where the alignments and the divisions are. Because when we speak of that, and understanding different practice models. The model that I still work in, for example, the midwives give the nurses orders, where they are our counterparts and enablers, understanding that we're not building fast enough. So the nurses support our work, and so just understanding there's ways to do this. There's very many models, and that we need more of us collectively looking at the beauty of the reproductive health space. And so what is that other saying about catching more flies with some honey? Because this is a big problem that we're all tackling, and we each have our role. And it's only together that we're going to impact for the positive future of the world.
Beautiful sentiments. I love the way that what did you say, the beautiful space of reproductive health. And we are so blessed, all of us, to be working in it. I want to take this 2 minutes to thank our wonderful speakers, Pandora and Dan. Thank you so much. This is the launch of the webinar. So I think we've set the bar high. And Bruna, can you just pop to the next slide, because we want to remind everyone that there is another one next week, or sorry, 2 weeks time. We'll be looking at gathering data and evidence, and so we'll have some more fabulous speakers to come and chat with us, and we can learn and share. And I'm really sorry we didn't get to all the questions in the chat box or the question and answer platform. They were all very valid. So we hope to see you in 2 weeks time, same place, and we're going to dance our way out of this session now. Thanks, Bruna.
And lots of resources in the chat, and we will be following up with an email with these resources, and even more resources. If you've got them, please send them to us, and we will send them out to everyone. Thank you again all for coming. It was lovely to see you all, and I can't wait to see you in 2 weeks.
Take care. Practice self-care.
Thank you, Gita.
Everyone. Thank you, Sarah. Thank
Bye,
you,
Sheila.
Thank
Bruna.
you, everyone.
Thanks, Bruna. We can. All right. Take care, everyone. Be safe.